healthy. It's good. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to call this meeting to order. This is the regular meeting of the Land Use and Transportation Committee. I am Supervisor Malia Cohen, chair of this committee, and to my right is Supervisor Scott Weiner, vice chair, and to my left, Supervisor Jane Kim. Our clerk today is Miss Lisa Samara, and also would like to recognize and thank the talented folks at SFGov TV, Jim Smith and Jonathan Stockus, for helping us broadcast this committee meeting. Madam Clerk, do you have any announcements for us today?
Yes, please make sure to silence all cell phones and electronic devices. Completed speaker cards and copies of any documents to be included as part of the file should be submitted to the clerk. Items acted upon today will appear on the May 19th Board of Supervisors agenda unless otherwise stated.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Could you please call item number 1, please?
Item number 1 is an ordinance amending the planning code to require certain uses obtain a conditional use authorization in the Castro Street NCD, the 24th Street Noe Valley NCD, the Upper Market NCT, and Market Street parcels in the NCT 3 district.
Thank you. This item is sponsored by Supervisor Weiner.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for scheduling this item today. Colleagues, this zoning legislation applies to the Upper Market, Castro Street, 18th Street and 24th Street NCDs, neighborhood commercial districts. And it is designed to ensure that our ground floor retail space is utilized in an active way with active uses as opposed to office uses. We've seen situations where where really centrally located ground floor spaces, instead of being occupied by retail or food or other active uses where people are going in and out all day, where it's open at night and on the weekends, are instead being occupied by office uses. Office uses are incredibly important and are a key part of any neighborhood, but they are not necessarily the best use, especially in significant numbers for ground floor retail space. And so the legislation for all three of these neighborhood commercial districts, Upper Market, Castro, and 24th Street in Noe Valley, will, in slightly different ways, require a conditional use in order to put an office type of use on the ground floor. For Market Street, from Octavia Boulevard on the west side all the way down to Castro Street, the legislation would make permanent interim zoning controls that I authored and that we passed about a year or so ago to require a conditional use for placing an office use in one of these ground floor spaces. In Upper Market, this is a particularly important issue because we are seeing significant new development along Upper Market Street from Castro to Octavia, with a lot of new ground floor retail space coming online. And the last thing that we need as a neighborhood is for that retail space to be overwhelmed with office uses. It's one thing if there's a little bit here and there, but we don't want it to become the dominant part of this new retail space. When that happens, you eventually hit a tipping point where the neighborhood commercial area is less attractive for people to shop, eat, and drink. For 24th Street, and then we extend those controls to Castro Street. For 24th Street, and this issue was triggered in Noe Valley when a longstanding hardware store closed and was replaced by an office use, and people were surprised that there was no public input that was required under the permitting process for that change. This control would require that business and professional services, as well as medical uses, secure a conditional use to go into a ground floor space. Again, the intent of these controls is to incentivize active ground floor uses along our neighborhood commercial corridors. It doesn't ban anything. It simply requires a conditional use when a non-active use is intending to go in. In crafting these controls, we work closely with our neighborhood associations and our merchant groups, and we have received strong support. We also received unanimous support from the Small Business Commission as well as the Planning Commission. And so, colleagues, with that, the Planning Department will present. Mr. Sanchez.
Get the mic at the podium.
Yeah. Hello. Okay. Good afternoon, Supervisor Diego Sanchez with Planning Department staff. Supervisors, on April 23rd, the Planning Commission heard the proposed ordinance before you as introduced by Supervisor Wiener. After deliberating on the matter, the Planning Commission moved unanimously to adopt a resolution to recommend the proposed ordinance with the following modification: to further study principally permitting business or professional service uses on the third story and above in the named NCDs. With that, this concludes my presentation, and I'm available for questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sanchez. And on that issue, colleagues, I neglected to mention what we also provided in this legislation is that for the second floor, for a second-story office use, it would be principally permitted. And that is a way of saying that we do want office uses in our neighborhood commercial districts, just not necessarily always on the first floor. And so we want to make it easy for these uses to go into the second floor. And actually, there was a great example recently in Upper Market where Zephyr Real Estate consolidated several of its real estate offices on the second floor of the old Tower Record space. And that, to me, is the perfect location for a large real estate office. It's centrally located, but it's not on the ground floor. I respect the Planning Commission's view that we should consider whether to make these office uses principally permitted on the third story and above. I think that would require a lot of additional discussion because in a lot of the new development going in, I think there's been a strong preference to have housing and not to have, especially if the market shifts and it becomes more lucrative to have office rather than housing. I think we wouldn't want to see a lot of these buildings effectively become office buildings instead of housing. So I will respectfully decline that amendment now, but I'm sure the conversation will continue. So, Madam Chair, with that, if we may open it up for public comment.
Yes, let's go to public comment. Ladies and gentlemen, just as a reminder, public comment is 2 minutes. You'll hear a soft bell when you have 30 seconds remaining. Please line up in the chamber right here at this podium, and it's open. Please come speak to item number 1 if you'd like to speak to this item. This podium, this microphone right here. Thank you.
Yes, I'm here speaking about the off-ramp on 5th and Harris.
Okay, we're not here. We're not at that item yet. But when you hear me call that item, you're more than welcome to come for public comment. So we're discussing public comment for item number 1, which is a planning code, Castro Street Neighborhood Commercial District, Noe Valley and Upper Market.
Name's Willie Ratcliffe. Published San Francisco Paving newspaper. I think that's an excellent idea that you've come up with that we can use out in our own community. The first floor be for type businesses, and of course the second floor office and on up. I think it's a good idea. We'd like to see it more than just where you mentioned. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Ratcliffe. I agree with you. I think it's a very good idea that we should continue to explore. Are there any other members of the public that would like to comment on item number 1? Okay, seeing none, public comment for item number 1 is closed. Mr. Wiener?
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. So I make a motion I move to forward item 1 to the full Board of Supervisors with positive recommendation.
Okay, without objection, this motion passes. Madam Clerk, could you please call item number 2?
Item number 2 is an ordinance amending the planning code to change the designation of 149 to 155th 9th Street, the Western Manufacturing Company building, from Category 5 unrated to Category 3 contributory under Planning Code Article 11.
Okay, thank you. Now, the Planning Department is a sponsor of this item, and I believe Jonathan Lammers is here to present on this item. Perfect. Thank you, Mr. Lammers.
Good afternoon, Supervisors. On January 21st of this year, the Historic Preservation Commission unanimously passed Resolution Number 743, recommending that the Board of Supervisors approve this change of designation. They determined that the building is an excellent example of an early 20th century industrial building constructed during a significant period of development in the south of Market. It exhibits a high level of architectural quality and relates well to its environment, and it also retains outstanding physical integrity. There are a few issues that I'd like to briefly highlight. Typically, the provisions of Article 11 only apply to the C3 zoning districts. This property is currently zoned regional commercial, but it's located in the South of Market Extended Preservation District, which embraces an area formerly zoned C3 in which the provisions of Article 11 are still in effect. With the change of designation, the property is potentially eligible for a Mills Act contract and can also pursue the sale of transfer of development rights. This change of designation also potentially permits office use on all floors of the building. Planning Code Section 703.9 states that in the RCD zoning district, office uses are permitted on all floors of qualified historic buildings. These include Article 10 landmarks and Article 11 Category 1 through 4 buildings. However, the office use is not authorized simply by this change of designation. For any proposed change of use, the zoning administrator will consult with the Historic Preservation Commission to determine whether the proposed use would enhance the feasibility of preserving the subject building. Also, the potential change to office use on all floors would not be subject to the recent amendments to sections 219 and 803.9 of the Planning Code regarding office use in designated landmarks. That legislation is specific to the PDR 1D and PDR 1G zoning districts. To summarize, the Department and the Historic Preservation Commission support this change of designation and recommend your approval. This concludes my presentation, and I'm available for any questions.
Thank you very much. I'd like to recognize Supervisor Kim.
Thank you. And I just want to note this project or this building is in the district that I represent, and I do support this amendment to change the category of historical category for 149 through 155 9th Street. I do have an amendment to propose for this item. It is actually somewhat largely technical, but the building sponsor does intend to go forward with an application for a Mills Act contract this year, and this amendment merely notes that, and I can just read it into the record. It would be on page 3. In lines 1 through 4, section number 4, notwithstanding the deadlines for application for Mills Act contracts set forth in section 71.3 of the Administrative Code for calendar year 2015, the property at 149 through 155 9th Street may submit an application for a Mills Act contract with the city until August 15th, 2015. So this merely allows the applicant to move forward with applying for the Mills Act this calendar year.
Thank you very much. Let's go ahead and take public comment on this item. So public comment for item number 2 is open. Anyone like to speak to this item? Okay, thank you.
Hi there. My name is Ani Vartanian. I'm the founder of Rubicon Point Partners. I manage the company with my husband, Razming Baladian. We started the company several years ago and have grown it exponentially here in San Francisco. We tend to invest in buildings that have architecturally interesting component to itself, whether it's historical in nature or has good bones, or could lend itself to being unique and special. And 149 9th Street to 155 is just that. The history of the building is one of glory to disrepair, now hopefully relevance. It was built in the early 1900s by Wenzel Stork as part of a leather tanning factory. After the tanning business went overseas, he repurposed the building for different uses, including his corporate offices, to an arts and crafts store, and then to his architectural firm for his sons. We bought, then in the late 1990s, early 2000s, it sat empty. The previous owner, or the Stork family, sold it to a hobbyist, a real estate hobbyist, and he did the best that he could to restore the building and get tenants in there. One of those tenants at that time was the small little firm called Code for America. When we bought it at the end of 2012, Code for America, as well as a few other tenants, were in that building. We have since maintained those tenants in the building. We, in fact, Code for America's lease came up for renewal last year, and we wanted to keep them. So in doing so, given that they were a nonprofit, we ended up signing a lease at 25% discount to market for the sole purpose of keeping them in there. We thank you for your support. Supervisor Kim, thank you so much for the resolution. We have received unanimous approval from the Historic Preservation Committee. We've received a letter of support from San Francisco Heritage, and I thank you for the support on the Mills Act, which we plan to submit later this year. Or we've actually submitted it. Thank you.
Great. Are there any other members of the public that'd like to comment?
Good afternoon. My name is Ruth Todd. I'm an architect and a planner and a principal of Page and Turnbull. I led the team of architectural historians and architectural conservators that produced the report that was submitted to the planning department and that has been in your packet of materials. Almost 3 years ago, we began working with Rubicon Point Partners to understand the significance of 149 to 155 9th Street and how to maintain and preserve this significance. The staff report provided a thorough summary of the architectural and historical importance of the historic building, and this report supports Page and Turnbull's findings that the building, constructed in 1923, meets all 4 criteria to be designated a Category 3 building under Article 11. This building has outstanding integrity and contributes to the character of Soma as much as or more than any other building in its neighborhood. The second part of our report that was produced once it was determined eligible as an Article 11 Category 3 historic resource was a maintenance plan to help the owner to plan, budget, and appropriately implement phased improvements over time, and these materials were part of a Mills Act application that was submitted on May 1st. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any other members that'd like to speak? Please.
Good afternoon. My name is Megan Riley, and I'm the Chief Administrative Officer and Chief Financial Officer for Code for America. We've been in the space since late 2011, and as Ani mentioned, the Rubicon Partners worked with us to extend the lease, so we're now there through 2018. We love the building. We love the area. Rubicon has been great in terms of making modifications to the building, keeping it upgraded, and we'd really love your support in being able to make the long-time use possible for us to stay there in the space. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other members of the public? Okay, seeing none, public comment is closed at this time. Supervisor Kim?
I'd like to move forward with the amendment as stated prior to public comment.
All right, thank you. So I guess without objection, the motion passes as amended. Supervisor Weiner? Okay, so this motion passes as amended.
And now I'd like to make a motion to move this forward with positive recommendation to the full board.
Thank you. Positive recommendation, without objection, passes. Madam Clerk, could you read item number 3?
Item number 3 is a hearing to receive an annual update on the Police Department citywide traffic enforcement progress, implementing the Focus on 5 strategy and Vision Zero enforcement goals, with data broken down by police district.
Thank you. Supervisor Kim, I believe you're the sponsor of this.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair Cohen. And I do also want to recognize that we have the president of the Police Commission here. And actually, if you would like to sit with our city attorney. Thank you, and I just want to thank you for making the time to be here. The Police Commission already has many of their own meetings that are quite long and quite frequent, and so we appreciate our president attending the meeting with the Land Use Committee here today. Today's hearing is something that we committed to do last year on an annual basis at a special joint session of the Police Commission and the Public Safety and Neighborhood Services Committee. We broke significant ground last year at a 4-hour-long hearing with the presence of Chief Sir and his entire command staff, which was a testament to the new reality that SFPD was taking the issue of traffic safety enforcement and our Vision Zero goals seriously, including committing to real performance metrics and procedural changes. I want to acknowledge and thank San Francisco Police Department for their leadership through both Chief Sir and then Commander Ali, who was the head of the traffic division, by committing to a cultural shift within the organization, recognizing that traffic collisions aren't accidents or acts of God, random acts of gods, but actually can be caused by negligence and breaking of the law, and that they are absolutely 100% preventable. Another significant commitment was issuing citations to parties found at fault in a collision, which has been a source of extreme frustration for many of our advocates and, of course, victims. And we saw that last year from the heavy turnout of victims of collisions at the hearing who had not seen justice served in their cases. Finally, SFPD committed to upgrading its database to Crossroads, which allows for an aggregation of data for analysis within a month or two, as well as solid commitments to up the percentage of traffic citations that focus on the 5 deadliest driver behaviors to 50% after the 2013 numbers showed that SFPD was issuing 22% of its citations for the top 5 deadliest driving behavior, which includes speeding, turn violations, violating the pedestrian right-of-way, running red lights, and stop signs. I do also want to point out and clarify that, of course, they vary by district to district, that this is what we have seen citywide, but it's not necessarily what is the 5 top concerns of each neighborhood. I look forward to hearing now the second installment in our annual update today, and want to recognize our new commander, Ann Mannix, who has since taken up the helm the last couple of months, and I know has been doing tremendous amount of work diving into the data and what work needs to be continued, along with meeting with a lot of our different community stakeholders, our residents, WACA-CEF, and the Bike Coalition on how we can more strongly support Vision Zero today. I believe we will also be joined by Supervisor Norman Yee, my Vision Zero co-sponsor, someone who has increased the champion of resources for enforcement. So I believe we have our commander up first. I do also want to recognize Cameron Sammy from SFMTA's enforcement program, as well as Aaron Miller Blankenship, who has been project managing Don't Block the Box campaign in our district. Finally, I understand we will have a brief Vision Zero update from Department of Public Health regarding the city's transportation-related injury surveillance system, TRIS, by the epidemiologist that we funded in the budget last year, Lilani Schwartz, who has been developing this database. So without further ado, I'm assuming there are no technical glitches.
Light.
I introduced Captain Mannix,
It's on the screen, but we can't reach it. Can you slide it over?
SFGov TV, could you turn on the overhead?
Oh, before Commander starts, I did want to give the President to make an opportunity to make opening remarks if she had any, as well as obviously other committee members.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Supervisor Kim, members of this committee, Supervisor Cohen, Supervisor Wiener. I just want to thank you, in particular, Supervisor Kim, for your leadership on this issue. We were here back in January of 2014 to talk about some really horrific results that we had, a terrible record of 23 San Franciscans killed either while walking or bicycling in our city. And I really think the approach that we took as a police commission with this body and with the department and the leadership was really to look at what we could do differently. And what we saw in 2014, and I know Commander Mannix is going to give all the details, but in one calendar year between 2013 and 2014, the department saw a 54% increase in citations, which, to your point, I think a lot of folks are in a conversation about police departments right now. And the President of the United States interim report on policing had a quote at the beginning of the report, and it said, organizational culture eats policy for lunch. So oftentimes you can have a policy that's the right thing, but without the leadership of folks like Chief Sir and Commander Mannix and Commander Ali to actually make change and get the department to really take a different approach to enforcing citations, we wouldn't have some of the results. So you have the full support of the Police Commission, and we're really proud of the department and the work that's been done. So I look forward to seeing what we've done and the work ahead. Thank you, Supervisor.
Thank you.
Thank you. Again, I'm Ann Mannix, Commander, liaison to the MTA. And I'm tasked with overseeing traffic and transportation from our end in the city. And our commitment to Vision Zero is through enforcement. And we have an education component as well. So in January of this year, as you all know, we issued a department, we had to educate ourselves. So we issued a department-wide DVD created with the efforts of WACA-CEF and the Bicycle Coalition to get officers to be more aware of traffic fatalities, collisions involving bicycles and pedestrians. The overall goal, again, is to reduce all collisions and by 2024 to eliminate all traffic-related fatalities in the city. So again, we had to educate ourselves, and today approximately 80% of our department has viewed this DVD. It's not 100% because 100% of the department isn't working
100% of the time. And we have a number of officers that are off on disability and for some other reason haven't seen it. And again, as a department, we are somewhat challenged by technology. So what's required in viewing the DVD is to view it and then to acknowledge through a computer that you have seen it. So that 100% hasn't been taking place. But 80% is a good number. And after that video came out, and we've also released it to the advocates so they can attach it to their websites as well. Not long after we released that, I did an informal query of officers on the street and found that they weren't so well educated on what Vision Zero was and what our role was. So I sent everyone in our department an individual email stating what Vision Zero was and our role in getting to Vision Zero by 2024. Enforcement, again, and education whenever they can. So what happens in our police department monthly? District captains are required to come up with operations orders targeting the highest collision intersections, focusing on the top primary collision factors. So monthly they create these operations orders based on statistical data that we provide to them, derived from Crossroads, Sweaters, citation issuance, and the like. And they, again, have their resources focused on those high collision corridors and those primary collision factors. Also, the traffic company does citywide enforcement, and they supplement the Field Operations Bureau whenever they can and whenever they're asked for. Special enforcement operations that we've done, again, around senior centers, school zones, we've issued hundreds of citations around both those types of facilities, as those are our most at-risk populations, the elderly and children. We've also done education components within the centers themselves, teaching seniors and children about traffic safety. Since December of last year, we've done a block-the-box enforcement operation, and the goal there is to clear up the intersections, to allow pedestrians to cross, to allow cross-traffic to get to their destination as well. Excuse me. And since then, we've issued about 3,300 citations in regards to that. Pedestrian decoy operations. Every district's been doing those too. We've issued a lot of citations. We're working very closely. We have a great relationship now with the California Highway Patrol, the local office. We've been doing a lot of joint operations with them as well. LiDAR, it's the newest form of radar. We use it for speed enforcement. The stations daily operate LiDAR operations when they can. And then I already mentioned our joint traffic safety operations with the CHP. Again, been very fruitful. We've educated a lot of people through the issuance of citations, if you want to call that education. And then we get into our, I've already mentioned our education and outreach, bicycle and pedestrian safety presentations at schools, senior centers, and district station community meetings monthly. District captains hold community meetings, and we've reached half of the districts so far. 2015, we'll reach the other half. And I recently offered to all the district captains that I would personally come out and talk to their community groups about traffic safety and our goals within the city. For 2015, as we go forward, we're going to continue and expand on that crossing guard program that I think Supervisor Yee pushed forward. I was actually a crossing guard when I was a kid. Taught me a lot about traffic safety, and it's a win-win all the way around. The kids learn, they take it home, their parents learn, the students that are crossing learn. It's just a great program. We've had a lot of fun with it, and we have a lot of more schools that want to get on board with it as well. And we're just going to continue everything we've been doing. Again, we can't do enough to educate because, we issue citations on a daily basis, yet the next day we'll come back and issue just as many citations. So we have to really get the message out to the public through education and other means of outreach. And we're going to continue our enforcement around school zones and senior centers. There's a real emphasis. You'll see in a later slide that as we've drilled down to the data, we've really determined that the speed is the number one issue that leads to these collisions, and we're really, really going to push this year to get more LiDAR enforcement operations out there, joint operations with the CHP around speed. And I touched on the next item. Okay, and what happened in 2014, it was before my time, and we came up with the top 5 primary collision factors, which included red light, stop sign, speed, failure to yield to pedestrians, and failure to yield on the left turn rather. You'll see in later data, sorry, there's a lot of data involved in all these slides, that stop signs is only in effect in one district, and it's the 4th top primary collision factor in that one district. It's not in the top 5 in any other police district, but we'll get into that with the data. And again, I apologize in advance because there's a lot of data you're going to see. I have to give a shout out to our lone analyst, Karen Lee, who's in the audience, who's put this together from a myriad of different data resources to make something cohesive and that makes sense to everyone. So here we have the 2014 citywide breakdown by stations of citation issuance. And we are at 24% of focusing on that 5. Again, remember, stop signs are in there. Another large number, the number 1 citation issued by the traffic company was for cell phone use and inattentive driving. April was Distracted Driving Month. You can almost argue that distracted driving leads to these other violations. So that might be number 6 that we look at citywide. Our biggest category, as it is every year, was others, and that includes the other 450 vehicle code violations that someone could commit when they're driving. But you see it again, we're at 24%. And here we are broken down by mode. In 2014, again, 2014 is obviously the most complete data we had. 2013 wasn't so complete. We started collecting data around mid-year 2013. And going forward, I predict it's just going to get better. Bless you. As you can see, 2014, 94% of all citations issued were issued to drivers of vehicles, whether they were motorcycles or cars. 5% were for pedestrians and 1% were for bicyclists. And then again, here's just a pie showing what type of, or who we gave citations to. Here, pretty self-explanatory, 2013 versus 14. 14 was the highest number of citations issued by the San Francisco Police Department, and it was because everybody was focusing on reducing collisions, which is one of our primary responsibilities, facilitating traffic, reducing collisions, and reducing crime in general. But as you can see, we had quite an uptick in numbers. Fail to yield on a left turn is somewhat of a difficult violation to catch in the act. Those numbers were down. Everything else up 27%. And you heard the commissioner before, we are up 54% from the year before based on that data. So the first quarter of 14 versus 15, you've never seen this data before because last time Commander Ali presented, this data wasn't available. We're down 2% year to date. Red light cameras. We issued 129,000 plus citations in 2014, and another 15,000 in red light camera citations were issued. Red light cameras are down. Some were taken down because of all the construction, and the timing of the lights was changed by the MTA, I believe based on complaints. I'm not sure why they reduced the timing of those lights. Down 2%. And a big component of this is our traffic company was involved in a lot of things that took them away from their citation writing responsibilities. And we'll get into that later. Here it is broken down by station. And every district captain was sent this PowerPoint presentation, and the data is there for them to read, interpret, and decide how to move forward with what they're doing as far as traffic is concerned. So you can see that some are up, most are down. And the totality were down 6% in citation issuance the first quarter. And then here we have the focus on the 5 first quarter of 14 versus 15, down 2%. So overall, we were down higher citywide in total numbers, but less so in when we're focusing on that 5. That would be interpreted to mean that we're focusing more deeply on the top 5 primary collision factors. And then this is the same data, just shown in a graph, a little bit easier to read. And again, all the captains were provided with this. Now here's a pie chart showing the top 5 primary collision factors as determined last year. It won't change much going forward in 2015. I believe the next 1 or 2 slides will show you what we'll be focusing on. And here it is citywide, and you can see 75% of our citations go to the other 450 or so vehicle code violations in the book. Now here's where we're going to be focusing in 2015. These are the causes based on all the data from 2014. And you can see it's broken out by police district. Of the data captured of collisions, again, you can see overwhelmingly unsafe speed citywide is number 1, 43% citywide. And pedestrian right-of-way violations is 16%. Then we go down to red light violations, 15, unsafe turning, 14, and then unsafe starting and backings, 12%. So we won't change much from 2014 to 15. And of course, if we see the violation, no matter what it is, we're going to pull the person over and cite for it. And then here we get into collision data. The most important thing that will come of our enforcement/education is that we reduce the number of collisions citywide. And the numbers for collisions, period, you see severe injury up 2%, other visible injury up 1%, complaint of pain up 8%. The most important, fatals are down 56%. Never good. It should be at 0 now, but we aren't there. But the upside of this is that of the categories that are up, they're down in pedestrian and bicycle injuries. They're up in vehicle injuries, if that makes sense. So I see that as a positive, but again, 1 death is too many. So I know you have a lot of questions. I have a lot of people here that can answer them, and I know there's more people to follow on further on this presentation as well.
Through the chair, if I can just ask a few quick questions. One, I didn't catch the number you read of the number of citations given for "Don't Block the Box." Was it 30
over
or
3,000.
3,000.
So
okay, I heard the 3. Okay.
Yeah.
And then I noticed that, in 2013 we saw that 23% of all citations are the top 5 deadly driving behaviors. In 2014, it's only rose moderately to 24%, although citations went up dramatically, which is, I think, a plus in and of itself, even if it's not all focused on the top 5. And I'm curious about some of your thoughts on that. I know it was a commitment that was made last year that we would try to get as close to 50% as possible, so that we were really focusing on changing the behavior of what we thought were the deadlier behaviors that drivers can make that can lead to serious injuries or fatalities, and some of your thoughts around that for last year, and if there's any reflection on that moving forward in 2015.
Yes, I believe that you'll see the numbers rise. Will we be at 50%? I don't think so. Richmond District will be at 50%.
Right.
And I've talked to Simon Silverman, the captain of the Richmond District, and he dedicates officers. He has the luxury of dedicating officers just to do traffic. And he has some pretty active, proactive officers that get out there and write as many citations. One officer himself writes 20 citations minimally a day. Not every district has that luxury. And certainly traffic could be a little more of a priority for the district captains. Right now we're dealing with violent crime. The homicide rate is higher than it's been in years. So it's a delicate balance, what they're focusing their efforts on. But again, like I said, I've sent this PowerPoint presentation to them. I've discussed it with other members of the command staff, and they're going to have a sit down with the captain. So it's not only me just saying, hey, you got to do more, but everybody's going to say they got to do more. And again, there's no downside to reducing the numbers of collisions. There's no reason to not get out there and educate through enforcement. So hopefully we'll see the numbers rise. But again, I can't predict that they'll be 50% by the end of this year.
Do you think it's important for us to hit that 50% goal, or do you think an overall increase in citations also is preventative?
I think the most important thing that we hit is the reduction of collisions. Mm-hmm. And certainly the reduction of serious and fatal collisions is the most important, obviously. And the most at-risk groups, people walking, people biking, children, the elderly, if we see that, we need to see those numbers go down. Mm-hmm. And so far this year, not good we have.
Yeah. I had also noticed that there's been a decrease in the number of citations in certain precincts, not on the west side certainly, and also not in the Tenderloin, which is great to see. But I am concerned about the reduction in citations given at Central and Southern, just because we know that those two precincts have a lot of the high injury corridors, the 6 or 7% of high injury corridors. And I'm wondering how that conversation is going. We certainly don't want last year to be the big year because we made the announcement and then, it fall in the list of priorities. Because, and by the way, I'm very sympathetic to the fact the police department has so many different priorities and a lot of different expectations that the community has. So it's not a blame statement when I say that. I'm just curious how we can make sure we keep up that level of energy, particularly in the stations where we know a high level of injuries could occur.
Right, I agree. Southern Station moved. It took them about a month and a half to move, so I think that may have affected their numbers.
Okay.
I've had the conversation with both captains, and they seem ready, willing, and able to increase their numbers. And certainly Captain Lazard, Central, very proactive captain. I think we'll see the numbers rise there as well.
And finally, another question that I had was just around the mobile handheld citation devices. I know that SFPD will be receiving $300,000 over 2015-2017 from DPH's Safe Routes to School program.
Regarding handhelds?
That's the number that I got. Am I misinformed by that?
Well,
I
right
see
now,
DPH
do you know
walking
that?
up.
Yes. Okay.
Hi, Anna Vlidzik with the San Francisco Health Department. There are 2 grants coming online this summer, one with MTA and one with DPH for the Safe Routes to School, and there is a third of the budget is dedicated to the police department. It is a 2-year grant, and the budget is for $300,000, and it would be doing enforcement for schools on high injury corridors.
Okay, but it wouldn't necessarily go to mobile handheld citation
devices.
That,
I believe, is the other grant with MTA.
Okay.
Ours was just staff time for the police department to do enforcement.
Okay, great. Sorry, then I will take back that question. And then I'll just say that I think it's important that we look for grants to be able to fund handheld citation devices for SFPD.
Well, what we have right now is, we all have smartphones. Mm-hmm. And what our CIO is attempting to do is to fund the ability to issue citations from the smartphone. That's the e-citation program.
Okay.
And we just went through MTA, and hopefully with an ad back, we can get it that way.
Great.
Supervisor, if I may, I just wanted to add a couple of points because I think you raise important points about the data and issues that arise through looking at it. One thing that the Police Commission did with our Safe Streets for All resolution was include a quarterly report back to the Police Commission on data and also require that we the Commission partners with the department and Walk SF and the Bicycle Coalition. Mm-hmm. So we meet every quarter together and look at the data and the trends. And it's really been a model, I think, in terms of collaboration where the Bicycle Coalition is saying, we don't understand this. The commander's able to explain certain things, and then all of that information gets presented to the police commission. Because to your point, policing is often reactive because there are things happening, there are different trends. And the key with Vision Zero, which I think you really laid out well for us, is it's about 2024 and taking the steps that we need to and keeping our focus on this enforcement and not letting it slip as other priorities come about. And so I think the department thus far, in continuing to have these excellent data presentations, the citations went up, and it is my belief that we are going to start migrating now that more citations are being issued to them being issued towards the 5. But to Commander Mannix's point, part of this has been educating the officers themselves with the data, and I think that's going to take a little bit of time. But I think Commander Mannix has been really good at explaining this to the advocates and actually to me, which is once you turn on a switch for an officer that they have to be enforcing traffic, they don't get to pick which violations to cite and not. They have to do that fair and square. So once they're looking, it's if they see someone doing something but it's not a focus on the 5, they still have been told to actually enforce these traffic rules. And so I think that we'll see a migration, but the only way that we'll actually keep that pressure on is to continue to look at the data with you, and certainly we do that quarterly at the commission.
Absolutely. Thank you, Commander.
And one thing with the block the box as an example of what the commissioner said was that the majority of citations issued aren't for blocking the box. They're for illegal U-turns or illegal turns to get into the box. So that's the primary violation that they're citing for right now.
Are there any other?
So I believe SFMTA and then DPH, in whatever order.
Supervisor Weiner has a question.
Oh.
Yeah. Thank you, Madam Chair. For Commander Maddox, before she sits down. Kenneth, thank you for the presentation and for really gathering this data and for taking Vision Zero so seriously. I think it really is terrific. I do want to raise an issue with you that I know I'm a little bit like a broken record, but I think it's an important broken record, and that is double parking. And in terms of what's been happening around double parking enforcement, we had a hearing, a month or 2 months ago about it. We heard quite a bit from the MTA, and what we heard was that double parking enforcement is actually declining in terms of the MTA, which was very disappointing. And I know that the MTA is going to be coming back soon with I've requested a plan in terms of how they're going to be ramping up double parking. I'm curious to know where the police department is around double parking. It's actually, as I understand it, much easier for the police department to enforce double parking than for MTA, because if the car starts to move, MTA loses its ability to do that enforcement. Maybe I'm wrong, but I think both departments have an important role to play. And double parking does play into Vision Zero. It's, of course, double parking is a huge problem in terms of traffic flow and muni reliability, but we know that a lot of double parking takes place in bike lanes, so forcing bikes to swerve out into traffic. It also can reduce pedestrian visibility. So if you could give us an update about where we are with double parking enforcement, I'd appreciate it.
Right now?
Yeah.
Well, I didn't put together an operations order, but after that hearing that we had, that I attended, I put out a message to each captain that it's a priority throughout the city to cite, not just warn, because I explained to you that why we just warn and get the violator to move along, to issue citations. I don't have a count on the citations we issued, and we don't track parking tickets as far as I know. Do you track ours or no? Parking tickets? Okay. So in his report, he'll probably be able to separate out the police department sites.
Okay.
But again, I did push that message out.
Okay. I understand I'm not expecting you to cite data right now, but just in terms of your general sense of where it's going, do you have a sense that there is increased activity within the police department on this issue?
I can't answer that today. Again, I'll remind the captains that it's a priority as we reach the goals or we work towards the goals of Vision Zero. Again, it's a priority. But I notice double parkers every day. I'm sure you do too. So are they out there with impunity? Some places they are. So
Yeah, I just, and I appreciate that you're reminding the captains, but ultimately they have to execute. And I know they're short-staffed, and we're all working hard to try to get more staffing, more traffic enforcement overall. But I think as we're ramping up enforcement, double parking should be part of that. It really does, as you know, play a real role. And it's not hard. I think I forget what you were referring to before. It's hard to catch people in the act. But double parking is a really easy one to catch people in the act, and you don't have to go very far to find them. So, thank you.
Good afternoon, Chair Cohen, Supervisors Wiener, Cameron Sammy, SFMTA Enforcement Manager. Just like to briefly talk a little bit about the gridlock citations that are enhanced enforcement, as we call it, don't block the box, that our parking control officers have the authority to issue. We actually, MTA enforcement has the authority to issue 2 different citations or for violations. One is gridlock, intersection gridlock, and the second is intersection gridlock turning. And the data you have before you shows that when we first started the enhanced enforcement pilot back in July of 2014, we focused 6 days during the Giants game days, July 3rd through September 11th, with approximately 4 to 6 parking enforcement officers. As a result of that 6 days, we focused primarily on South of Market and the Bay Bridge approaches. During that time, we issued 1,689 citations during those 6 days. Now we come to December, which I want to focus on. At the hearing that was held before December, here at this committee, we talked about beginning an enhancement enforcement of Don't Block the Box. So beginning on December 4th of last year, to focusing on Thursdays and Fridays, 4 to 6 parking control officers. We issued from December 4th through April, end of April, 3,514 gridlock citations. So the numbers are going up. Again, our goal is to ensure that we increase pedestrian safety, minimize the intersection blocking, and look upstream, downstream to make sure that it improves cross-traffic flow. And I think once we measure it once again, we hope to do that either in the summer or the fall, that the numbers have improved.
Mr. Sammy, I'm sorry, could
Yes.
you repeat the number of citations given since December again? 3,000?
3,514, that's between December 4th and end of April.
And then, and you said they primarily operate Thursdays and Fridays from 4 to 6 p.m.?
From 3:30 to 6:30.
3:30, 6:30. And,
Correct.
and how do you select the intersections? I know they're throughout the South of Market and on the approaches to the Bay Bridge.
So whether through observation, we've worked a little bit with the Bike Coalition to get some locations that they've been concerned with, complaints driven by the public. And so currently we've tried to develop some consistency by working first in Harrison, for example, or Market Street, 3rd, 5th, Beale, Mission, and we've also moved to other locations. But again, the concentration right now has been on First and Harrison. And the hope is that we build some consistency and see if we can improve things there first. And it would also improve downstream as well.
Thank you.
You bet. And again, we'll continue this effort till the end of the year and measure our success and determine how we go forward. And with that, do you have any questions?
Thank you. I believe Supervisor Weiner has a question.
Hmm?
Oh, no? Okay. Supervisor Kim? No questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Are there any other departments presenting on this item?
Department of Public Health.
Okay. DPH.
And I do just want to recognize Leilani Schwartz, who is actually a epidemiologist that was funded through the Board of Supervisors in the add-back process last year as one of our Vision Zero commitments.
Thank you very much. I wanted to apologize on behalf of Megan Weir, who couldn't make it here. She was originally supposed to be giving this presentation, and she's unable to due to illness. So I would like to thank you, supervisors, for this opportunity and your time today to present on this, on all of our work with Vision Zero. So as Commander Mannix displayed, there's a lot of data that SFPD collects, and a key component of Vision Zero is evaluation and monitoring of prevention activities in the city. These 4 goals are listed in our 2-year action strategy. The first 2 are underway to expand trans-based monitoring and analysis for targeting initiatives, monitoring and evaluating data, and then as Supervisor Kim mentioned, development of a comprehensive injury surveillance system, which is what I was hired on to do in December. And so we will be piloting the transportation-related injury surveillance system by the end of this year, and these findings should be added to TransBase. Also, to expand evaluation activities, track progress, target resources, looking at pre- and post-data collection for key initiatives, and tracking progress of all of those interventions. Also, a goal is to expand web presence for transparency, accountability, and monitoring and tracking of impact of interventions. So the police department is a valuable and key partner. They're a lead agency within Vision Zero, and as seen in Commander Mannix's presentation, they hold 2 important pieces of data. Citation data, which helps us answer what specific traffic violations are being cited, where, when, and what those impacts are on injury and death. Also, they hold the key to fatality and injury data, so we can answer who is being injured and killed, where and how, and where we need to target Vision Zero efforts and evaluate if these efforts are effective. This is kind of a snapshot of where we're at with citation data currently. As Commander Mannix mentioned, we're at district level reporting today. We'd like to be at location level reporting. So right now, the technology that they're utilizing doesn't have the ability to collect the location information of where that citation is being issued. I believe everyone was at the San Francisco County Transportation Authority Vision Zero committee hearing where there was a budget request for this $600,000 for the e-citation project, which would transition from handheld citation devices to something phone-based that would allow collection of that location information when a citation is being issued.
Through the chair, may I just ask, why is it that we can't do location level reporting? Because when you get a ticket, it usually cites the intersection at which they give you the ticket.
I'm going to have Commander Mannix answer that one.
It's a data inputting issue.
Okay.
Vast majority
It's
of
not a data
citations are
field.
still written by hand.
Got it.
Thank you. And just a snapshot of where we're at with our injury fatality data. Currently, fatalities, we have timely, coordinated, centralized, accessible portal for the public and city agencies to access. With our injuries, and I'll be talking about fatalities in a little bit more detail in the next couple of slides. With transportation injuries, currently there's a data delay. We have gaps in coordination and centralization and accessibility, which we're working on to address, which is the main objective of my position. So ultimately, we would both like these health outcomes to have timely, coordinated, centralized, and accessible access for city agencies to utilize data and the public. In collaboration with the police department and MTA, along with DPH, we've developed a traffic fatality protocol. So on a monthly basis, this has been happening since January. DPH, MTA, and the police department sit at one table and determine what traffic fatalities we're reporting to Vision Zero. And these are based on a uniform case definition so that we have consistency and accuracy in reporting fatalities to Vision Zero for transparency and monitoring of deaths in San Francisco due to traffic. And so this table summarizes the number of traffic fatalities through March of this year, which is the most current data that we have available through the police department and through the medical examiner's data. And so this model kind of segues into what we would like to do for transportation injuries as well. This traffic fatality protocol we've developed is kind of a pilot of what we would like to do also with transportation injury data. We do have some challenges with police data, with SWITRs. That is over a year lag, which is a key input in data evaluation and strategizing with interventions. We are piloting for more timely data with Crossroads, and in the future we hope to have access to that at the Department of Public Health, but right now they're finalizing some contractual issues, and we hope that when that's resolved we will have access to that data. But there have been data gaps identified through past research at UCSF and San Francisco General Hospital that have identified that approximately 20% of pedestrian injuries and 25% of cyclist injuries are not captured with police-reported injury data. And so part of my position is using the trauma registry data and linking that with our police SWITRs data to have a better representation of the collisions that are happening on the San Francisco streets. And also combining that with other important city agency data like emergency room or emergency medical services data to kind of fill those data gaps. And lastly, I just wanted to also mention TransBase. So with the development of the transportation injury surveillance system, ultimately, the outcome of that data would be posted on TransBase, which is an open source, web-based portal that houses over 200 variables and allows for the immediate mapping of these important transportation and health data, which is utilized by several city agencies and has been useful in, I don't know if this is the right presentation. As an example of the utility of Transbase, it was used in the city's data-driven process for pedestrian safety for Walk First. And so that allowed for the evaluation and analysis of injury patterns in San Francisco to identify capital safety improvement priorities in the city. And so, pretty much
Great.
sums everything up. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Is there anything? That's the last presentation, but I did have a question. First of all, it's really great to see the outcome of our funding from last year and how this is going to help translate to functional evaluation methodology, which I think is a really key part of getting to zero, is understanding how the collisions and fatalities and injuries are occurring. I know that part of the purpose of the program is to establish a consistent way to categorize fatalities, for example. And could you talk a little bit more about that in a nutshell? And I know that we have historically had different fatality numbers come from SFPD, SFMTA, and CHP. And for the layperson, I think that's very, very challenging to understand. And I'm hoping that you can kind of just break that down a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, that is what the purpose of that group convening was, to get a proper traffic fatality case definition together. And at first it seems counterintuitive that death is death, right?
Right.
But in the past 3 months that we've met, there's a lot of circumstances, unpredictable circumstances that happen on the roads. We have to have exclusions based on intention. So if the death was due to suicide or homicide, we don't include those in Vision Zero reporting. Additionally, if the death occurs outside of San Francisco or outside of the city and county's jurisdiction, so if it's on Caltrans Freeway, we don't include those deaths as part of Vision Zero. We are tracking them and our hope is that at some point we can engage the state and Caltrans, because those are deaths that are happening in the city. But with MTA's jurisdiction over engineering improvements, they cannot do any improvements on the freeway. Although at ramp intersections, so if it's a ingress or egress ramp to a city street, we are including those in Vision Zero death reporting or traffic fatality reporting.
We did have an individual who was killed in the pedestrian plaza at 5th and Harrison last year, which is, Caltrain property, but it's right off the egress for the 80 and 101. Would that count as
that would be included in our traffic reporting?
That would be included in your traffic report.
Yes.
And is that the primary differential, is that it occurred on the freeway, which I actually completely understand, which is not within the jurisdiction of San Francisco, or it was a homicide or suicide? Are those the main three categories that aren't included in the fatality numbers?
Suicides. We also are not including any underground fatalities. So BART.
Got it.
Or Muni Underground. But we are tracking light rail vehicle.
Okay.
And we plan on, accessing the data from MTA if it's Muni above ground related traffic fatalities as well.
You do include those?
Yes.
Just not below ground?
Yeah,
okay.
Not underground.
That's understandable. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Seeing that there are no more further department presentations, I think it's best for us to go into public comment on item number 3. If there are any members of the public that would like to speak on this item, please come up to the podium quickly. And remember, you have 2 minutes.
Thank you. My name is Richard Spoor, and I personally know the person that was hit underneath the bridge. And it's kind of sad that it seems like there's a lot of shuffle and blame as far as who would be responsible and who would not be. Obviously, Caltrans is employed by either the state or city, which means that there's more than one person to blame for any kind of inconsistencies in people's safety. More to that, if the police were more in tune to watching the traffic and not maybe the homeless and the people that are out there doing whatever they're doing, It would probably be a lot safer if they were paid more attention to the drivers or the people that are causing the accidents, not the people that are out there just trying to get by in their life. You know, we get tickets every day for either being in a place where we're supposedly not supposed to, but it's an open air place. How can you not be allowed to be in an open air park, plaza, or area that is doing nothing but containing rocks and grass? To me, that doesn't make any sense. They're wasting their time giving us tickets when they can be out there enforcing the laws that have to do with saving people's lives. The accidents that are caused, the different things that are done, that's not because of us. But I guarantee if you check the amount of tickets that they give to the homeless, it's way higher than the people that they give tickets to for the accidents.
Good afternoon. My name is Nicole Ferrara, and I'm the Executive Director of Walk San Francisco. I want to thank you all for being here today, and especially want to thank President Loftus of the Police Commission and Commander Mannix and the team at SFPD and Supervisor Kim for calling this hearing. This, I think, want to take a step back and look at where we were last year and how much we've accomplished. I know some of my favorite highlights have been things like back to school enforcement blitzes around school zones, the enforcement that happened around Broadway leading up to right in front of Gene Parker back to school, looking at Van Ness enforcement went after a really severe spate of fatal crashes. And, I think that the police department has definitely stepped up to the plate, and they're definitely working hard to reach this goal. I think the leadership has been incredible, and I really want to thank President Loftus and Chief Sir and Commander Ali and Commander Mannix for modeling what the rest of the department should follow, and we are seeing that in the stats in terms of the number of citations being handed out. I think the exciting part about Vision Zero is that it is strategic. We're not looking at just increasing citations overall. We're looking at how increasing citations actually prevents dangerous behaviors and prevents deaths, and that's where increasing that percent of focus on the 5 is really important. So even if a station area is really strapped for enforcement, making sure that the enforcement that does happens in a strategic manner, so it is actually enforcing those 5 most dangerous traffic behaviors, really is critical to getting to this goal. And that is the preventive part of enforcement. And I also want to just jump off of what Richard was.
Through the chair, may I ask a question?
Yes, please.
Well, I'm hoping that you can actually finish your comment, and then I did have a question about the 50% on the top 5.
Sure. So just bouncing off of what Richard was saying earlier, and Mrs. Williams, who lost her husband, he was talking about that incident, and the number of citations that we're seeing for things that might not be as lethal, making the advantage of focusing on the 5 means that we're not unjustly disproportionately burdening a group of the population who is already receiving or is already more likely to be in a traffic collision. So we're not necessarily ticketing people who are in our low-income communities and communities of color. The point of this is actually to ticket the things that kill people, and we know what those are, so we really do need to focus on that. And then the last thing to just highlight is that as we move forward and we go through this next budget cycle, we definitely want to support the data sharing, the app that the police department has proposed, and the data sharing that will come out of that, because then we'll actually know where these citations are happening. We can then also free up the traffic enforcement capacity so that the data is being evaluated by DPH, and that their time is spent actually doing the police portion of their work, and the epidemiologists are dealing with the data. So again, thank you all, and I know you had a question, Supervisor Kim.
Yeah, no, I had a question. I asked this of Commander Mannix, and what I think all of us were pleased to see, both from the Commission and the Board, was a dramatic uptick in citations given, period, particularly to drivers. I know that, there's a lot of concerns about pedestrians and cyclists, but, not achieve. How important do you think it is also to achieve the 50%? beyond, or do you think an overall increase in citation also is preventative?
I think achieving the 50% is probably the most important thing in terms
more than just an increase in citations.
Yeah, because I think once you start, I think they're both very important, but the strategic part is that I know I can't speed anymore on this street. I know that if I speed on this street, I'm going to get a ticket, and that is the behavior that we want to affect. So, telling people that they're going to get tickets on Van Ness if they speed and actually delivering on that is exactly what we want. And maybe our police department doesn't have the capacity to do that many citations, and we need to start looking at automated speed enforcement. And I hope I think the city has committed to that, and we hope that Sacramento does too. But I think that actually changing that behavior and making it clear to the public that we're serious about failure to yield, about speeding. These things kill 40% or injure 40% of all, or responsible for 40% of all traffic injuries. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Yes, my name is Mrs. Yvette Williams. I'm Wilbur Jean Williams' wife. I lost my husband over in the plaza on 5th and Harris. That was unsafe for the city, for them to have the plasma there, unsafe, and for Caltrans also for not having a wall there and not having it lit up. There's a lot of ways that it could have been prevented where my husband and him and I could have grown old together. And it was to, instead of putting the barriers back, to put up a wall, a retaining wall. Also have a hazard sign before you're entering your exit to let you know there is a sharp turn. On my way to this meeting, I went over to get one of the homeless there, and there was an accident at that time. They hit the wall almost. They hit that barrier, and they drag it through the park. Instead of telling the homeless they cannot be there, it's illegal to be there. I don't understand why it is when it's seating for it. It's unsafe for pedestrians, cars that can be teed, anybody there at that freeway. They did put the lights up, they did put some arrows, but they don't have a speed to slow down before you getting off. And me losing my husband there, it's been a big loss to me. And nobody seems to want to take credit for my loss, including Caltrans, the city, and the drunk driver. I know there's nowhere safe from a drunk driver. I see it on TV all day, how a drunk driver end up in your house while you laying in the bed and kill you. But a lot of this fault is due to Caltrans and the plasma.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Good afternoon, supervisors. My name is Rudy Asercion. I'm the executive director of the Filipino American Associations. I'm here to speak on behalf of the tour bus legislation that the mayor recently signed into law. And I was at the Golden Gate Park for an hour and some minutes over the weekend, and I saw no less than 3 tour bus drivers narrating.
Mr. Asercion, I'm sorry to cut you off, but we're actually not taking public comment on tour bus legislation.
I'm not specifically speaking about that. I'm just wondering whether...
I'm sorry, I've been corrected.
I'm just wondering whether... how it's being enforced, number one, and number two, whether including the enforcement of the citations being issued to tour bus drivers or being narrating could be included in the police report so that we can have we can also have that evaluated, because unless we know, we don't know if it's being enforced or not. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Supervisor Weiner.
Madam Chair, if I may just say, I don't know exactly when the mayor signed that ordinance, but under the charter, it takes effect 30 days after the mayor signs it. So I don't think it's been 30 days since, unless I'm...
No, you're probably right, because the mayor signed it on April 24.
Yeah, so 30 days after his signature, it's officially in effect.
Yeah. So I'm only concerned that it's not being enforced, and I think if we include it in the reporting of the police department, then we have a way of monitoring whether it is or it's not being enforced. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Thank you, supervisors, for holding this item on the agenda, number 3 for enforcement by Commander Mannix and her division that she now leads. Thank you very much, Commander Mannix, for this enforcement. It's so important for Vision Zero. I serve at your will and your approval, supervisors, to represent pedestrian safety needs of seniors and people with disabilities. The one fatality that has occurred so far this year, Alfred Yee was in the Richmond District, under the Richmond District Police Station, and how can we coordinate constructive awareness in the data of where enforcement is needed and occurring in that district, since that is a high percentage of seniors who own property in the Richmond, both in District 6 and District 4, is a high number of seniors who own property. We need to have constructive engagement of the enforcement data to ensure enforcement is being carried out and contextually improved for seniors and people with disabilities. We have right there at the intersection of Palm, Geary, and Arguello, the new, now 8 years old, Institute on Aging facility. How do we coordinate on Geary Street where there is only a crosswalk, not a traffic light? So enforcement there is very important, particularly for seniors, as they are what is described in several plans: Executive Directive on Pedestrian Safety, Vision Zero, and the Better Streets Plan. Seniors are vulnerable pedestrians, along with people with disabilities and mothers with children. So please, we have to have constructive, engaged data on enforcement in District 6.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Good afternoon. My name is Katie Liddell, and I have been involved in pedestrian safety since 2004, and I'm so excited. I'm really heartened. I want to thank President Loftus and Commander Mannix and all of you for just putting attention to this, because for so long, people just didn't get excited about pedestrian safety because it's boring unless something bad happens to you. So I'm just excited to see finally it being recognized. And thank you, Supervisor Kim, for really bringing it to everybody's attention. I do have a couple of comments after listening today. I would love to eventually hear more information from Mr. Sammy around how they select the intersections, a question you asked Supervisor Kim. He said observation, feedback from the Bike Coalition, and public complaints. I'd like to know more detail around what kind of observation, how does that work, how do they work with the Bike Coalition, and how do they deal with the public complaints. I would like to know from Commander Mannix, when are those citations going to stop being written by hand and actually recorded in a database? I'm excited to know that this Crossroads thing is coming on board. We don't have to depend on Switters because it's always old information. So I'd like to eventually get more up-to-date data on that. But thank you all very much for your attention to pedestrian safety.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. I'm Alice Rogers, and President Loftus. I am basically here to cheerlead. I really appreciate this full focus on Vision Zero, and this data collection is incredibly important to we in the neighborhoods. It was a lot for me to take in today, so I can't comment very intelligently on what I did here today, but the data essentially will get boiled down into very digestible segments that we then can transfer to our neighborhood, and so our neighborhood can help participate and inform your ongoing work. We today are having a Vision Zero presentation at our neighborhood association. It's a program that we take incredibly seriously. So keep it up. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Hi, my name is Anthony Ryan. I just wanted to offer a little just street level perspective as someone who rides my bicycle for daily transportation. I observe, and I know it's a huge job, but to try to enforce these things. But I think anyone in here who drives knows that speeding is tolerated universally. 10 miles, 15 miles an hour over the speed limit. We all know that is the main factor in fatalities and injuries, and yet that continues. So that just needs to be addressed more. So perhaps with speed cameras. I'm also very heartened to see this focus on Vision Zero. However, I do bristle a little bit when I hear that we're teaching children and seniors about street safety, traffic safety, when we have drivers driving in deadly, unsafe manner constantly, knowing that they will not, in all likelihood, face any consequences for it. So I just think that focus is totally misguided, and it needs to be, any education that needs to take place towards drivers. And they also need to see more consequence if someone is killed. We need a district attorney who's willing to prosecute people who kill people with vehicles, people who use vehicles as weapons. These people just go on. They don't, not only do they often not face jail time, often they're driving again on our streets. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Good afternoon, supervisors. My name is Angelina. I'm a youth organizer with Chinatown CDC. I just wanted to thank you guys for having this hearing and really focusing on the role of enforcement in Vision Zero. I think the citation data is very telling, and it's great that PD is working towards the goal of having citations kind of reduce the bad behaviors. I also wanted to kind of encouraged to see if there's more interface between enforcement and education. In Chinatown Central Station, we've had a great relationship where PD officers have worked with us at the table to really educate pedestrians on these focus on the 5 behaviors and what to look for, but while they're enforcing driver behaviors at where we see the high injury intersections and corridors are, but also having PD be very responsive to where the communities have expressed concerns for, where a lot of close calls where the data isn't saying this is a high injury spot, but community wants to see enforcement. And we've had that happen and unfold where the community feels like they're seeing policing efforts, and for the most part, we're hoping that this leads to safer conditions. Thank you.
Okay, are there any other members of the public that'd like to speak on this item? Okay, seeing none, public comment will be closed. Supervisor Kim?
Thank you. I just wanted to make some closing comments, and I appreciate this update from last year's actually very historic hearing with the Police Commission on how we do traffic enforcement and how we are working to change the culture at San Francisco Police Department around a priority that we've all really committed to. So I want to thank everyone in this room actually for their work on that. It is work that we will continue to do, and I want to make sure that we continue to keep the urgency on this issue, even when the stories aren't in the limelight. And I'm really excited about a number of things with the data collection. I actually am very excited that we're going to be using an open source site that members of the public will be able to utilize as well and enter data into. I think that's incredibly important. And I look forward to moving towards a better system of enforcement so we can collect that data in a more timely manner. I also wanted to, I will make sure that we invite SFMTA to our next District 6 pedestrian safety work group so we can talk about Don't Block the Box and give feedback on the intersections as was brought up today by our residents. This work is going to continue. I think that we're really happy to see a reduction this year in fatalities. Of course, as Commander Manick said, 1 is too much. But I do think it's important that our efforts are reaching some goals citywide, and I look forward to continuing to invest and support this work. It's just really great that we have such a cross-section of stakeholders, both our city departments, our police commission, but also our residents that are working really hard to make Vision Zero a reality. And I want to thank members of this committee as well, because they have been huge champions of Vision Zero. And I don't know if the president would like to make some closing comments as well.
I just wanted to say thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your leadership on this issue and really pushing on this with the department. And that is it.
Thank you. Supervisor Kim, would you like to file this item or continue it? File it to the...
Motion to file.
All right. Motion to file unanimously accepted by this committee. Thank you. Madam Clerk, would you please call item number 4?
Item number 4 is a hearing to review the disposition of 30 Van Ness Avenue and requesting the Department of Real Estate to report.
Great. Supervisor Campos is the author of this item. He'll be joining us shortly. Just 1 minute.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Thank you, colleagues, for allowing us the opportunity to have a hearing on this item. This is something that I call for simply to have a report and discussion about the proposal. I think that it would be beneficial for us to have a better understanding of what the plans are, and I know that there are different reasons for the plan. One thing that I would like to do is to have a conversation whenever it's appropriate to figure out how this fits into the larger housing strategy that the city has. I think that given the gravity of the housing crisis, these kinds of questions, what do we do when the city owns land, are questions that we're going to have to raise more frequently. And I think that it's something that will be a positive thing because we have to figure out how we leverage the limited resources we have for the purpose of building more affordable housing. So it is in that spirit in which this hearing was requested. And with that, I don't know if anyone else wants to have any other comments, but I know that we have a presentation.
Thank you. Supervisor Campos, maybe you can facilitate the hearing from this point on.
Great. And I don't know, I know that it's in Supervisor Kim's office, districts. I don't know if Supervisor Kim.
I just say a few things really quickly. I just look forward to this presentation. I know that there's a number of different competing interests and policy priorities that we have here, of course, at the city. Last year, we passed overwhelmingly in November Proposition K, which called for 33% affordable housing in developments for low and moderate income households. And we also have a surplus property ordinance which prioritizes any surplus property, the city, to be transferred to the Mayor's Office of Housing for development for housing or services for the homeless. And I also know that the city has its own needs as well, whether it is raising revenue or, of course, what I agree with is a much-needed office building, which I'm excited that we are moving forward with. But as we move forward with this development on what is commonly termed as the Goodwill site, I do think it's really important for us to examine the transactions that are involved and how we kind of evaluate our different priorities and the different sets of needs that we'd like to see as outcomes of property that is owned publicly. I know at question here is 30 Van Ness, 1660 Mission, and 1680 Mission in particular. What is the best use for that site? Is it to raise revenue for our city office buildings? Should we be considering affordable housing options? And so I just look forward to the discussion. I think it's an important one for us to have and really flesh out. I know it's very complicated and a lot of different mechanisms that are involved, but I think it's an important conversation to have. And I want to thank Supervisor David Campos for calling this hearing today.
Thank you, Supervisor Kim. And I know that we have a presentation from John Updike of the Department of Real Estate, and I also want to acknowledge that we are joined today by the Director of Planning, Planning Director John Ram. Thank you to Director Ram, as well as the head of the Mayor's Office of Housing, Olson Lee. So thank you, Mr. Lee, as well, for being here. And with that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Updike.
Thank you, Supervisor Campos, Chair Cohen. Good afternoon. John Updike, Director of Real Estate. So first, I certainly want to thank you for the opportunity to not only review the sale of 30 Van Ness, but also understand how it fits within, as Supervisor Kim mentioned, our overall space reorganization strategy. So 30 Van Ness, let me briefly describe the asset for you. It's a 180,000 square foot office building, corner of Market and Van Ness. We have city uses that are above a corner Walgreens and a few other various first floor commercial uses. We acquired the building in 2001. It was built originally in the 1920s as 3 separate 2-story buildings. And then in 1965, 3 stories were added onto those base 2 stories. Seismic retrofits done in 1993 and 1997. It has long been recognized as a transit-oriented development opportunity site. It's underutilized, clearly, in its current form and function. City uses in the building are DPW, the Department of Public Works primarily, but also the Department of Public Health and the Department of Emergency Management and a few others. Those uses and what they do and the services they deliver to the public, we believe, can be delivered more intelligently through better designed, more sustainable properties. However, until a viable destination location is solidified, the city remains on site. We are in full occupancy of the building. Literally, the only occupancy is less than 500 square feet on the first floor of former retail space that was vacated but is not ADA compliant, so it will remain vacant until the property is redeveloped, most likely. So the property is technically not surplus. This is further reinforced by the fact that the city is marketing the property, and we're showing the cover of the marketing brochure here on the screen now, with an intent to lease back the building for city uses for a minimum of 4 years at a below market rental rate. That provides us sufficient time to secure a new destination site while not negatively affecting the operating budgets of the occupant departments. Let's take a look at what the board has seen so far on this item. In 2014, we brought before the board 2 items. One, a letter of intent. That was related to the development of the Goodwill site and our development partnership that was then forming with related companies. In December, the board approved an ordinance that authorized us to move forward with a conditional purchase and sale agreement between the city and related, who are now the owners of the Goodwill site, and leasing it back to Goodwill. And then, of course, we're here today with this item we will be returning to the board this summer relative to the specific item of 30 Van Ness sale and the terms and conditions of the proposed sale for your consideration. So where are we on the sale of 30 Van Ness? It's been placed on the market as of mid-April. Tours have been ongoing since the end of April. The first call for offers will be at the end of this month, and we anticipate that process will lead us to a best and final proposer or proposers to bring before the board for consideration in late July. One question asked is, why are we selling now? The market, as all of you are acutely aware, is peaking. This is the opportunity to monetize the asset today, pay off our debt against the property. We have a little over $30 million of existing certificate of participation debt against the property, bank the remainder funds toward the destination properties that better suit our needs. Given the nature of the market, it's also an opportunity to catalyze this future dense mixed-use housing development, which I think is really the essence of this hearing today, where we can insist upon robust affordability after the city departs the site. We have the better opportunity to leverage that in a hot market as we have today amongst the intense competition between those interested in our property. So let me talk briefly about the Goodwill site. One possible option of a destination site is this Goodwill agreement, which has been approved but is conditional upon the CEQA process that we are currently engaged in. It's the existing Goodwill site shown in red on the screen before you, immediately south of 1 South Van Ness. 1500 Mission Street is the address. It affords us the opportunity to consolidate our customer service functions in one location. True one-stop permitting. There's one thing I heard from the Board of Supervisors. It was the strong desire, if we were going to move forward with an office project, to accomplish that goal of one-stop permitting. As you see here, we currently send our customers, our clients, your constituents, to a multitude of locations to get a permit. This brings them to one location. It can also provide for one-stop HR functions for city employees. That's going to make us more efficient in what we do and how we do it and how we hire and train and operate within the human resources world. So we will have retirement, health services system, as well as Department of Human Resources and our training functions, all located on this site. That'll allow us also to exit some leases, which is part of the financial pro forma of the overall project.
I'm sorry, what are the properties on the right, closer to 7th Street, I believe?
So we have
between 8th and
leaseholds
7th?
at 1155 Market Street and 1145 Market Street, where we have the Department of Public Works permitting. We have HSS and retirement located in those locations. So those are moving in this direction.
Thank you.
You bet. Again, the overarching goals of space reorganization is to consolidate the functions, improve the service to the public, stabilize our facility expenses for the next generation, and exit our more dysfunctional properties. Some we own, some we lease. This gives you a snapshot, if the Goodwill property project moves forward, what that would look like, moving from 6 different properties into 3 different properties at the end of the day. Very briefly, because this is an ever-changing discussion right now as we move and migrate from massing toward architecture on the project, and as I say, move through the entitlement process. This highlights the goals of this particular project at 1500 Mission: one-stop permitting, on-site childcare, shared conference and training facility, LEED Gold standard for the delivery of the project, green roofs, terraces throughout, a wellness center incorporated into the project, and of course excellent access to public transportation, which we will work hard to improve, as well as the pedestrian experience on 11th Street, which could certainly use improvement. We anticipate this project will bring all those things to bear. This is a quick look at a one-stop permit center and how that lays out on the site, with Mission Street to the lower part of the screen. Almost an acre is necessary to put all the permitting functions in one location. This accomplishes that, while also, from a consolidated development standpoint, providing mid-block alley access, transparency through the building, and I want to mention, of course, what Related is accomplishing on their residential side. That's 550 units of residential product that get developed here, 110 on-site affordable units, 20% on-site.
How many
Commitment
bedrooms on-site affordable housing units?
I'm sorry?
How many bedroom? What's the bedroom mix?
I don't know the exact mix yet. I think we're still going through that as the design matures.
Sorry. Okay.
Great.
I see you got a strong backup.
I do. I have a fantastic bench
They
here.
probably know
Yes.
the answers.
The bench is almost stronger than the presenter, let me tell you. Reviewing again what's coming up for the board. So once we complete this solicitation process for 30 Van Ness, we'll return to the board with proposals for your consideration. We will return to the board again post-CEQA for the Goodwill project, separately and apart from the sale of 30 Van Ness, for ratification of that sale agreement. We'll return to the board for the potential sales of 1660 and 1680 Mission in early 2016. And we hope to see construction start in late 2016 at the Goodwill site, assuming things move forward and the mitigations are acceptable out of CEQA. And by end of 18, begin moving into the new facility. In the budget assumptions that were presented to the board this fall as part of the Goodwill development, we indicated an assumption of proceeds from the sale of the 3 properties, and you see that reflected here. So that's all part of the financial pro forma going forward, that the funds from the sales of the buildings we currently occupied would be returned to the project to facilitate moving to a destination location. So lastly, I just want to say that at 30 Van Ness, we want to balance this need to be fiscally responsible toward this project of delivering new office space, better office space, more efficient services for the public, while also leveraging as best we can the highest possible allocation of affordable housing out of the agreement. And I think because we have hit the peak of the market, we have seen tremendous interest from the private development community in this asset, as we should. It's a keystone location served by great transit. This is our best opportunity to sort of have our cake and eat it too. And that's what I hope to be able to present to you, is something that gives us the financial metric that we want to meet and gives us a very high affordability element to the future redevelopment of the project once the city departs the project. And again, my colleagues, I'm sure, can add to this and answer any questions you might have. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Who else is speaking?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just had a couple of a number of questions, if I may, and I don't know. I have probably more specific questions about the transaction itself, and I know that there may be questions that Supervisor Kim and others have, including the sort of why isn't this surplus, and I think those are relevant questions. But one basic question that I had is, and I raised this with Mr. Updike, and I don't know if our planning director or the head of the mayor's office of housing has a comment. But it's just a very basic question. We went through a walk through, the mayor and I, on South Van Ness, where we were trying to identify soft sites, pieces of land that the city could purchase for the purpose of building affordable housing on those sites. And I'm not the most sophisticated person here, but just one quick question is, why not use this piece of land that we own at 30 Van Ness and have us build affordable housing on it, and to do it in such a way where you can build office space to the extent that's needed, and then build 100% affordable housing on top of that? Why not go in that direction?
Thank you, Supervisors. John Ram, Planning Department. I think the RFP does, as I understand it, does certainly encourage to maximizing affordable housing on the site, and John can certainly talk about the goals of how the Goodwill site project is to be funded. I will say that the way the market, two things that come to mind, the way the Market Octavia plan currently is structured is that the site, and the way Prop M is structured is that the site, if the office space is demolished on the site, it would need a new office allocation to actually rebuild office on the site. So there is a sort of unusual incentive to actually keep the office building that's there, at least for a period of time, because of the way Prop M works on the office allocation program works. The other thing I would say, and I think Olson can speak to this more specifically than I, is that once you're above 7 or 8 stories, the actual price per unit goes up dramatically in terms of the building code, in terms of the cost per unit, because of the type of construction that's required for high-rise buildings. And I know that Olson and the Mayor's Office of Housing is often concerned about high-rise construction for affordable housing. Those are two things that come to mind. Having said all that, I mean, clearly we're trying to maximize the amount of housing, affordable housing, that can be built on this site if the site is meant to be housing in the long run.
Supervisor Kim had a question. Director Ram?
Oh, I'm sorry. Could you? I just had a question about the Prop M allocation. Mm-hmm. So, if I heard you correctly, one of the incentives of keeping the 30 Van Ness site is so that that allocation is kept in place, because it's already accepted into the Prop M allocation.
It was pre-existing office space. So it didn't need a Prop M allocation. But if it was to be demolished, you could not rebuild the office space without a new Prop M allocation, even if it was the same amount of space.
And when it's demolished, does it also then kind of take down the number? Does it give you more allocation in that year?
No. It does not. What's demolished does not go back into the pool.
Okay.
Yes.
Go ahead. Sorry, just one other question. Is the thinking then that any potential purchasers of the site would be interested in keeping the building as is?
The other thing to point out, and which I neglected to mention, is that the Market Octavia plan was really, because of when it was done, which is only 8 years ago now, it was really dedicated, the goal of that plan was to incentivize housing development. So high-rise office is not permitted on this site in the Market Octavia plan. High-rises are only permitted for housing.
I see.
Under the current plan. Now, the question is whether you all think that should change, but the current zoning restricts the high-rise portion of the site to housing.
And so potential prospectees could be looking at either residential, demolishing and just doing residential, or keeping the current site as is, being grandfathered in both Prop M allocation and the zone and the use.
And I believe I think the way the zoning currently works, you could add a little bit to the office, but not a whole lot. Now, again, someone could propose a change to the zoning to allow more office, but that's the current zoning.
Do you believe that a developer could build on top of that site currently?
I don't know the structure of the building. I doubt you could add that many stories. You could maybe add one or two. Yeah.
One of the questions that I had in reviewing what is a very complicated transaction is, to the extent that the existing strategy doesn't pan out, because there are still entitlements and a number of things that are in flux. What are some of the other strategies or plans that you have in mind to address both the housing needs that we have, but also the office space? What are some of the other options you're looking at? I don't know if Mr. Updike, if you can comment on that.
Sure, I'll speak to the needs of our space issues, and I'll let Olson speak to the housing strategies. But from a space standpoint, we're continuing our discussions in the marketplace with owners and prospective owners of properties within a several block radius of City Hall, or at least proximate transit radius up and down Van Ness. There are a number of development opportunity sites, both existing and proposed, that could also be a solve for us, a destination for us out of 30 Van Ness. We believe what we have proposed and what the board has approved, this conditional purchase and sale agreement, to be the best of those options, or we wouldn't have brought it forward. But being prudent, we are also pursuing options in case, as you say, things don't go as we expect them to relative to CEQA and next steps.
And in terms of the approvals that the board has to provide, I know there's CEQA review. Are we on the hook for money if for some reason the board decides not to pursue that?
Yes, the current obligation of the city up through CEQA is a little over $8 million, which, if you think about it, what we leverage with that $8 million and is an interest in $30 million of land for a period of almost 2.5 years that we've effectively tied up. So we looked at it sort of in that prism and felt that that was a fair price to pay, a fair risk to take to continue to move the project forward. Olson?
Yeah, Mr. Lee.
Yes.
Just a couple thoughts on the transaction, and the whole notion of the sort of the capacity of individual sites. So not all sites are created equal, right? The sites that we looked at with the supervisor and with the mayor and some of his other staff on South Van Ness have a maximum, probably, 85-foot height limit. The site at 30 Van Ness is much higher than that. So therefore, that land value is much higher, and the likelihood that you would acquire that land and build a shorter building is probably not an economically sustainable solution. But that said, given that it's highly likely that somebody would look at the site and see the value as high-rise residential, I think that given the fact that the city needs to clear a certain amount of money to meet its goals to produce new office building for the city. The question is how much beyond that, a sort of value will the bids actually come in, and what can you do in terms of the bids, in terms of the level of affordability. Everything. I think everybody understands that it is a bidding process, and one of the goals of this board, as well as the city, is trying to maximize the amount of affordable housing units. They're going to look at a bid that tries to meet both those goals for the city overall, both the financial sort of goals for the city as well as the affordable housing goals. So I would not be surprised to see an aggressive bid both on the land value side if they're going for high-rise residential, as well as on the affordable housing side, in part because they understand what the process is. Again, for the mayor's office of housing and what we look for land sites is really a question of we're not going to build a 40-story building for affordable housing. I think that the examples of what we've done in Transbay are an ability to utilize a portion of the site, maximize that value for the market rate, and use that sort of benefit, the economic benefit of those market rate sites to build affordable housing adjacent to those particular parcels. And because of both the state law obligations for Transbay, we're going to be able to meet the 35% affordable housing obligation by having what we call affordable housing shoulders, and also affordable housing units as a part of the larger towers in the base of the towers. And that sort of the economics of those sort of transactions work well for affordable housing. We would not take on a 40-story building for affordable housing for a couple of reasons. One, we could clearly build it. People build large, tall buildings all the time, and that's not a problem. The problem really is, can we operate it? Can we operate something that needs elevators to the 40th floor? Can we deal with the whole question of the life safety systems on an ongoing basis? In looking at some of the other residential, high-rise residential, the cost of operating those residential units, granted they're in a market rate building, close to what we would charge for rent solely, without any sort of accommodations for replacement reserves and operating reserves, as well as vacancy and loss factor. And those costs would go up on a market basis, not based upon the change in area median income. And the concern would be the long-term financial viability of those buildings should those the expense numbers sort of not or actually the rent numbers, the change in median income numbers, not keep up with the market rate increases in the expenses overall. So I think that in terms of this particular project, clearly the goal, one of the goals of the city, is clearly to ensure that the city clears enough to accommodate the needs for the office buildings, for the office space. But I think looking at both the potential affordable housing on the balance of the recipient side, the Goodwill side, as well as what might happen at 30 Van Ness since the bidding process has not been completed, we will be looking at additional affordable housing and that will occur after sort of meeting the financial goals of the building replacement. This is not to say that the Mayor's Office of Housing is not interested in acquiring property for future affordable housing, but I think we have to be strategic. I think we have to be strategic in what neighborhoods are impacted the most, where we can build cost effectively, where we have access to services and things along those lines. And there is a issue related to the question of scale. Each individual unit that we support has to be subsidized, And as we get to a certain point in terms of the total number of units, we sort of reach our limits as it relates to one individual project taking the bulk of all the affordable housing funds that the office may have in a particular year. So this is typically not the type of site that we would acquire. Clearly, if it was a trans-based site with a little more flexibility, we would look for the affordable shoulders, but we have a couple of other competing goals on this particular location as it relates to the city office building, in addition to, again, trying to ensure that we get the most affordable housing out of the transaction, but meeting that other goal. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'll turn it over to Supervisor Kim. I know that she has a number of questions. Supervisor Kim?
Thank you. I had a couple of questions on the surplus property, city property ordinance. I think it may be best addressed to Olson Lee or John Updike. I know that by July 15th of every year, the city administrator submits to the mayor and board of supervisors any transferring jurisdiction to the mayor's office of housing. And actually, part of it is that I just haven't seen the list over the last couple of years and what that process has looked like. I know that while we define surplus property to an extent where there's it's either a complete 100% vacancy and other sorts of things, we do also ensure that the city administrator's office has an additional set of eyes in terms of what and when departments deem something surplus or not. And I also understand, actually, I didn't realize this until I reread the ordinance last night, that we're actually supposed to have a citizens advisory committee that also evaluates what's been submitted to the city administrator office. So there is some public accountability to ensure that departments aren't hiding property away from being used for affordable housing and therefore transferred to the mayor's office of housing. So I was wondering if how many properties have we transferred to the mayor's office of housing since this ordinance has come into place?
So right after the ordinance was adopted, a fairly aggressive search of city inventory was completed, and a little less than a dozen or so assets were immediately identified as potential transfers to the mayor's office of housing. That went through the CAC for review and comment. Many of them moved forward to the board for a jurisdictional transfer to the mayor's office of housing. What we learned, I think, in hindsight, looking at that process, is after Olson's staff completed a more rigorous review of those properties, many of them were deemed to be either undevelopable or seriously challenged with respect to development opportunities. And so while some have moved forward, many were just deemed to not be appropriate for housing and difficult to market for sale. The surplus property ordinance is really two paths. Once a property is declared surplus and transferred to the mayor's office of housing, either it can be developed for affordable housing or it can be sold, and the funds then are applied toward affordable housing. So that's what I'm speaking to about whether it was developable or not. So what we found was we have a lot of surplus assets that are either undevelopable or really hostage to an adjacent property owner because of their size, configuration, access requirements, utility constraints, you name it. So listed on Real Estate's website are those surplus sites that were reviewed previously by the Mayor's Office of Housing and the CAC, rejected as being appropriate for housing purposes, but then moved forward toward a disposition process so they could yield revenue. However, those that are listed on the site were just down to those little slivers of property that really only the neighbor might be interested in acquiring, as an example. So that's typically what we have now in our inventory, with very few exceptions. Mm-hmm. And you see those exceptions really on a one-off basis as they move forward.
How many properties are in the inventory for surplus property, roughly?
How many are in the inventory?
Mm-hmm.
I would say probably about 35 or so are on our current list, and we can get you that exact list. Happy to provide that.
Yeah, no, I apologize. I didn't submit these questions in advance, so I didn't expect an exact number. And of these, and since the ordinance has passed, how many have we actually sold and then used those funds for affordable housing?
We'll have to get that number back to you, Supervisor. I think the best example of one of the surplus properties is 150 Otis. that was a surplus property under the jurisdiction of HSA, which was developed for affordable housing for vets. But the ordinance was passed prior to my arrival at the Mayor's Office of Housing the second time around, and I don't have that information to you exactly at hand, but we will get that information to you.
So since the passage of the ordinance in 2002, Mr. Lee, you're only aware of one property that was actually developed into housing for the formerly homeless, and you're not aware of any properties that were sold and whose proceeds went towards this purpose?
I'm not personally aware of it. Again, I'll have to check with my staff about what properties were disposed of. And
now that has the process changed now? And I'm not sure if this is a question for Mr. Updike or for Mr. Lee, but Mr. Updike had mentioned what the process was when the ordinance first passed in 2002, kind of the rigorous process, the really hard look at all of the properties. What is the process like now? So I know every year departments do still have to submit a list to the city administrator, and the city administrator then submits a list to the board and the mayor in July of this year. So what is the process now, and when was the last time the CAC met?
I'll let Olson talk about the CAC status since that falls under his shop. However, with respect to the current process, after that first rigorous review, and I think it's important to know that a lot of time and energy was spent, multiple staffs, multiple departments, immediately after the ordinance was passed to review all of the city's properties. And so then going forward on an annual basis, it's a self-reporting process. So departments self-report to real estate of the availability of assets for sale. Now, we have had sales of properties. It's not to say we haven't. And in 2007, we sold, I think it was 5 properties through public auction, the proceeds of which, some of which went to affordable housing, some of which did not, but that was at the behest of the board. So on occasion, you might be presented with an ordinance instead of a resolution for the sale, and the purpose of that on sale is to dedicate funds for some other purpose. That's at the discretion of the board, of course. So there are those instances. And so it's a self-reporting process. We are spending a little more time, and in fact, one of my budget requests is for a staff person to be dedicated to not only uncovering, but moving forward with the disposition of surplus assets, because I know there are more out there that are not being reported that I would like to put into our inventory and get on the market, return it to the tax rolls if that's the case. If it's not suitable for affordable housing, let's sell it, get that money into Mr. Olson's budget, and move forward with the intent of that ordinance.
Great. And maybe not a question appropriate for today since the city administrator is not here, but I'm curious whether that extra set of eyes and accountability has actually pushed, or the city administrator's office has been able to push back on departments when they might kind of hide properties from that list. I'm curious what that process has been like. And Mr. Lee, I guess the question to you on the CAC.
This is a question I'll have to get back to you on. I'll talk to my staff on the level of activity of the CAC. I do not recall being noticed for a CAC meeting in the recent history, but I will get that information back to the board.
Yeah, I don't think since I've been on the board in 2011 the CAC has met, but I wasn't actually aware of it until I really fully read the ordinance last night. So I would love to work with the Mayor's Office of Housing on bringing that back into implementation.
If I may, so going back to this property, so why not declare this property surplus?
Because it is not, Supervisor. It is fully utilized by the city for office functions. But for the creation of a destination for the property, it is not technically surplus yet. I mean, you make a valid point that at some point we're entertaining a sale. The board will deliberate on the specifics of a potential sale, and at that time, then the question would rise, is it declared surplus? And if so, if the funds are deemed to return to the project, in other words, the recreation of replacement office space, that becomes a matter for the board's discretion. I believe that is our intent, and that was our intent in our presentations to the board this fall as part of the financial pro forma for the overall project.
So I guess legally, thank you, Mr. Updike, can you begin the sale of the property before you declare it surplus?
We can. We have done what is required of us in terms of notification to both all city agencies as well as state and federal agencies. So we follow the McKinney Act in our process of disposition and advise that it is an opportunity of an asset to be placed out for sale. And in this case, we did not receive any responses or requests for negotiations. So we have followed the normal process. If it was a vacant property, we would have followed the same process. So
maybe if I may ask the city attorney through the chair, legally, is this how this is supposed to work? That you can sort of put as a property for sale before you declare it surplus? How does that work?
Deputy City Attorney John Givner. In terms of the mechanics, I defer to Mr. Updike and the City Administrator's Office. Ultimately, the board, on occasion, will adopt an ordinance, and I think one of the speakers mentioned this earlier, concluding that this property is not subject to the surplus city property ordinance. I think that Mr. Updike was saying that's a step further down the road. And that's when the board commits to approving the sale and says you can sell this property for this purpose in connection with the moving of city offices. And for policy reasons, this sale is not going to be subject to the surplus property ordinance that would otherwise require it to be used for affordable housing.
So as we have this property out there, thank you, Mr. Givner, out on the market, do people know that we haven't declared surplus yet? That it's, I assume it's possible that the city could decide that it isn't, right?
The offering and our relationship with our brokerage firm representing the city and county of San Francisco is very clear about the fact that the ultimate decision lies with the elected officials and the Board of Supervisors and mayor. So that's very clear, and really everyone in the marketplace understands a public transaction has that caveat.
And then just a final question in terms of, do you think, maybe this is a question for Mr. Lee, do you think that before action is taken by the board on this property that there should be some review by the Citizens Advisory Committee on whether or not this should be surplus? Or, what's your thoughts in terms of how you're going to proceed with this? It seems like the CAC hasn't met, so...
This is the city administrator's office and the Department of Real Estate are operating within the letter of the current ordinance, and under the current ordinance, this property is not surplus. And again, part of it is the whole notion. This is again, as Mr. Updike said, this is about creating office space for the city, in addition to creating affordable housing in two different locations. So I think that it's a call up for the Department of Real Estate, but clearly the Department of Real Estate feels that they're operating within the surplus property ordinance itself.
Okay, thank you. Colleagues, unless you have any comments or questions, I'll open it up to public comment.
Well, I'm sorry.
Oh, yes.
I had a couple questions.
Sorry.
That goes back to the surplus, the list of properties that are on the surplus property list. I think it was Director Updike, you described the properties of either being challengeable, undevelopable, or difficult to sell. And I was just wondering if you can give me an example of what exactly does that look like?
So we have a number of properties that were acquired, you may find this hard to believe, but acquired for road widening purposes. Believe it or not, we did that many years ago. And literally, they are remnant slivers of parcels, not independently developable, of 1,000 square feet or less, which really have value only to the adjoining owners. But it's a conversation we should be having with those adjoining owners. We just don't have the resources to do that discussion and perhaps entertain a few transactions where we can return these slivers to property owners for additional yard space, for example. Others are near hillsides, so they might have slope concerns that while the square footage might yield a unit or two, once you consider the slope or the vehicular access restrictions that some parcels might have, they just don't end up yielding much at all. And so that, of course, affects value or our ability to sell the properties.
Thank you very much. So why don't we open it up to public comment? Any member of the public who would like to speak on this item, please come forward.
Good afternoon, supervisors. I'm John Arbling, president of Taco Group. And I'm astounded, honestly, to come today and hear from the several department heads and not hear them say, yes, we well understand that last fall the voters approved Proposition K and set a standard for 33% affordable housing development in San Francisco. And then on city-owned property, where they are about to, or they're proposing to make a deal to allow a 40-story luxury high-rise residence of some kind, not to require, though, that 33% of those units be inclusionary affordable housing. I mean, doesn't the city follow its own policies on its own property? I am astounded. And I understand that last year for the Goodwill site, perhaps 20% affordable was a good standard, but that was 2014, and this is 2015. And Prop K is passed, and I'm surprised that they have not said also we're going to go back and reopen negotiations with Related to achieve 33% for that 40-story luxury high-rise project. I mean, the city has to walk its talk. It's time to do it. Well, as you say, I'm surprised. There's a long road of approving these projects ahead. It's not a slam dunk. We're going to fight these projects if they don't do this, because if the city doesn't answer the challenge of Prop K on its own property, how can it possibly require other developers to do the same thing on theirs? It's hypocrisy. So I think it's time for the board to make it clear. Thank you.
Good afternoon, supervisors. My name is Fernando Martí with the Council of Community Housing Organizations. I wanted to make a couple of comments about surplus properties. There were, I believe, 2 surplus properties that have been built as affordable housing. One is 150 Otis, which Olson Lee talked about. The other one is Broadway Sansom. There have been several other properties that are under development right now, 17th and Folsom, which the PUC never declared as a surplus property. Or the Upper Yard in the Balboa Park Station, which the MTA never declared as a surplus property. But the community organized to turn those into affordable housing, and now they are moving forward. So let me read a little bit of our surplus properties ordinance. Surplus property shall mean any property that is not required to fulfill the mission of the city, department, commission, or agency with jurisdiction or control of such a property. I guess if you are not required to fulfill it in 5 years, it doesn't count. There's also underutilized property, which I think I heard Mr. Updike very clearly say this was an underutilized property. So what does the surplus property ordinance say we should do with those? Well, number 1, they should be used for affordable housing for people who are homeless or persons earning less than 20% of the median income. Number 2, other on-site services for people who are homeless. And number 3, affordable housing for persons earning no more than 60% of the area median income. But the executive director may determine that this surplus property is unsuitable for those uses. I believe I may have heard that it was maybe too good for poor people. And so you might then determine that must be used, designate use of the net proceeds of such sales and or leases for the purposes of financing affordable housing in San Francisco. I believe what the city attorney has told us is you got to write a new ordinance to change that if you're going to go against an ordinance that is already in place. I think you need to follow the ordinance that's in place, and that might be one way to meet our Prop K housing balance.
Thank you. If I may, I wanted to see if there's anyone else from the public. Seeing none, I think public comment is closed. I just wanted to have a couple of follow-up questions, if I may. Sure. One question that I had for any of the gentlemen that are here, have we done a sort of an audit of our compliance with the surplus property since the ordinance was passed in 2002?
Supervisor, while not specifically to that ordinance, there have been both a budget and legislative analyst report, I'm thinking it was about 4 years ago, and 2 civil grand jury reports that looked at how we report on the status of our properties, how we integrate that with our capital planning process, a process that is maturing and improving. And we do have some action steps ahead of us still with respect to some of our reporting, but much of that has been approved. In fact, we issued our first annual report this year in real estate, partially in response to the concern of not having enough transparency. So we have made strides to improve upon that.
Well, I think that it might be about time to ask Mr. Rose to do an audit of our compliance with the surplus property ordinance. And then the other question that I have, which I think is a really important point, which is with the passage of Prop K, where we're telling private developers to build at least 33% affordable, is there an intent to do the same on the Goodwill property and on the 30 Van Ness property?
Supervisor, with respect to the Goodwill property, that was a transaction that was negotiated now almost a year and a half ago, brought to the board initially in July of 2014. The metrics of that transaction, and it's a complex transaction of a 2-acre site, joint development. At the time of the discussion, some uncertainty even with respect to the acquisition of it from a third party. So I want to just give you a flavor for the complexities involved in the negotiations that informed the final financial pro forma from both the city's side and Related as our development partner on that project. Having said all that, that got us to the point where an agreement was brought forward to the board and approved by the board. A reopener is troubling from my perspective in that to reopen that issue probably also allows many other issues that might have been compromises on the other side. Could make it difficult. I'm not sure that's a viable path forward. We're always happy to have a discussion with our development partner, but I would be somewhat concerned about what that might yield at the end of the day. With respect to 30 Van Ness, we're out in the marketplace right now, so I don't know the essence of what offers we will see and how we will be able to balance this need and the tension between those needs, between a high financial return and robust affordability. We want to see both. And I have every intention of bringing forward to you options that will sort of let you change that dial. I think we'll have several different variations on themes to entertain, but it's a little too early in the process to be able to be precise about that. You're going to see precision in a couple of months once we see offers.
Well, on the first piece on the Goodwill property, it doesn't seem like this is a done deal yet. So I would certainly encourage you to consider living up to the intent and spirit of Prop K. But just a final question on the 30 Van Ness, the RFP that went out. I imagine that in the RFP we referenced the Prop K language since that was something that we're asking private developers to do. I imagine that we included that in the sale of our property. I imagine that's included in that RFP.
What is included is a very clear statement of the expectation of this community that the existing code is a place to start, but not a place to finish. So we have made it very clear that any developer should expect that we have a very high bar set.
Let me ask it differently. Did we reference Prop K and the intent of Prop K in the RFP?
We did not make a specific reference to that proposition. However, I'd be surprised if any major developer who's credible and capable of tackling the complexity of that development isn't fully aware of the community's position on the issue.
My suggestion would be for any city agency that is interested in sort of what happens here, that to the extent that this is policy that was supported by the Board of Supervisors, by the mayor, that we should, as a matter of policy, walk the talk, and that if we're asking private developers to follow the intent and the spirit of Prop K, that we should do the same when it comes to property that we are trying to sell. So I'm actually surprised. So I'll leave it at that. Supervisor Wiener, I think, had a...
Yes, thank you, Supervisor Combos. I just have a question about if we're going to talk about the surplus property ordinance, I know there's an issue of whether this is surplus property or not. And I agree, it is one of those ordinances that I think is, we hear about a lot, but I don't know how often it's really put into action. But one thing I was just reading the surplus property ordinance because it had been a while since I'd read it. And you know, in Prop K, for example, it's about 33% of low or very low, and also moderate. So it's really 0, I guess, to 120, if I'm not mistaken. And because I think there's this growing desire in the city to have affordable housing definitely for low income and also for moderate income, because it's harder and harder for working class, middle class people to really remain in the city. Now, the surplus property ordinance indicates that the number one, it prioritizes how you use a surplus property. So I just want to make sure I got this right, that the top priority is for people making 0 to 20% of AMI, which would be 0 to about $14,000 or $15,000 for a single person, and 0 to $20,000 for a family of 4. Am I right about that, Mr. Lee? And I'll keep going. The second priority is to use the property for services for homeless people. And then the third priority, which would be hard to imagine ever getting to the third priority, is for people making up to 60% of area median income. And so the surplus property ordinance seems very geared towards extremely low income, which is really important. We need to house our formerly homeless people and need to really provide resources for people who are at the very low end of the income spectrum. But we also have this just massive need for people who are just sort of working class, middle class, moderate income San Franciscans in that 40, 50, 60% and up into the 80, 100%. The surplus property ordinance doesn't really speak to that pretty large and struggling demographic, am I right? You're nodding your head, Mr. Lee. So, am I correct about that?
I believe we would all agree you are correct about that. The surplus property ordinance really is focused on that 0 to 60%.
And well, it's really on 0 to 20%, because you're never going to get down to that third priority unless we have far more surplus property that's developable than I think probably most of us realize. And so I just want to be clear that I think when you talk about Prop K, for example, there was a massive desire in this city for affordable housing at all levels, at very low, for our formerly homeless, for people at the poverty level, but also for low-income people who are working, and for moderate income people. It's for that entire spectrum. And that's what Prop K was about. It was San Franciscans saying, we want affordable housing at all of these levels, not just one level, but not the other. And the surplus property ordinance is one piece of that. Now, I don't know if the surplus property ordinance should be revisited to make it more flexible, make the dollars or the property more flexible in terms of making sure we're meeting all of the needs. But if we're going to talk about using property that had been intended perhaps for, or is an office building, and talking about taking that out of that use and putting it into affordable housing, I think we should have that broader conversation, because we have so many different affordability needs in the city, including for the folks who a retail store manager who's at 40-50% of AMI, or a family that's at 70 or 80% of AMI and really struggling to stay in the city.
Thank you, Supervisor Weiner. Supervisor Kim?
Thank you. Just wanted to thank, again, Supervisor David Campos for calling for this hearing. I think it's important for us to have a deep dive and discussion before the 30 Van Ness parcel comes before the Board of Supervisors to get a better understanding of what the city is looking at, the costs and the benefits of us being able to build this new office building, which is greatly needed, by the way, and I just want to express my support for that again. I do think that we do need a consolidated building for our city departments, and I do think that the vision is quite appropriate. But we do have a lot of different policy priorities here at the board that we have to balance, and I understand that. But we know that affordable housing, is one of the top priorities of those. And as we move forward with our properties that we are considering for sale, I do really want to emphasize the importance of Prop K and meeting those goals. I know that in general these three properties sit, actually these four properties sit within the Market Octavia plan, and I know that the planning department in our office has been in discussion about reopening the EIR for the District 6 portion of the Market Octavia plan and looking at just updating the zoning and the heights. But in exchange for doing that, looking to achieve 33% affordability in that area as a whole. And I think that this is certainly a part of the city that deserves development. It's a very large corridor, obviously very transit-friendly, both for workers and for residents. And I want to make sure that we are planning for this neighborhood with the appropriate ped safety, open space, and other infrastructure that's needed to make this a real neighborhood. But as we have more developers looking at the site, and as we have now set a goal of 33%, I think it's really important that we are able to achieve that. And I think that our city properties should be the role models for all of our private developers on ensuring that we hit those goals in this area plan. So I just want to emphasize that I do really, I will support Supervisor Campos in doing another look at the implementation of our surplus property ordinance. It's certainly an important one. And I think that we just want to make sure that we are maintaining a level of accountability for all of our city departments, that they are transferring sites to surplus property as this board has mandated or voted for, that we are building affordable housing, that we are building housing for the homeless, or if the sites truly are undevelopable, that we are raising that revenue to be able to hit these goals. So those are just some of my closing comments, and I just look forward to working with all the departments as we move forward. I think that there is a way to achieve as much as we'd like to see in terms of hitting all of our goals. It's just making sure that we are able to work together to get there.
Colleagues, I wanted to thank you, and I just wanted to ask for a motion to file this item. I do want to thank you for the opportunity to do this, and I look forward to hearing more as this project moves forward. One thing that I have to say I am concerned about is that to the extent that the Goodwill site doesn't have the level of affordability that's envisioned in Prop K, I worry about what that means if the board decides not to support that site, because we've already, at 20%, because we've already invested millions of dollars. And so what happens to that investment? So those are questions that I think we're going to have to figure that out. But thank you.
Thank you. So Supervisor Campos, just so I heard you correctly, you're looking for someone to make a motion to file this to the call of the chair? Motion made by Supervisor Kim. This motion is filed to the call of the chair. Madam Clerk, are there any other items before this body?
Madam Chair, just to clarify, you just want to file the item, not to continue the call
Yes,
of the
I'm
chair.
sorry.
Yes, file
File
it.
the call of the chair.
That concludes our business for today.
All right, thank you. This meeting is adjourned.